Hello and welcome. My name is Beate Kubitz, and this is the Smart Transport webinar on active travel. Today I'd like to welcome several experts in the field. Phil Jones, Chairman of PGA, Ed Pegram, Business Manager at Cycle to Work at Raleigh UK, Paul Roberson, Head of Cycle Projects for the Department for Transport, and Mehmet, Ahmet, Transport Manager, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. I'm Beate Kubitz. I'm an independent researcher and writer on smart mobility, new mobility, mobility as a service and active travel, and recently a cargo bike delivery service in the rural area of West Yorkshire between Manchester and Leeds. So it's a particular interest to me today to see lots of experts in this field who will be discussing social and economic benefits of using electric bikes, e-cargo bikes, micromobility, how those new and varied contributions to the transport landscape can make transport more affordable and to make cities and more navigable, and indeed rural areas as well. So part of this issue is also the active travel element being helping people's health and well-being. I'm hoping to hear from each of these people how we outline the key challenges and how we can face those challenges and get more active travel on our streets. So, moving on, just checking that we've got Ed available. Ed, are you with us today? I'd like to introduce Ed Pegram from Raleigh UK to talk about your initiatives and how you're supporting electric bikes in the UK. Are you with us, Ed? Hello? I think we've lost Ed possibly for sound at the moment. Can we start potentially with Paul, please? Would you like to give us an outline of the Department for Transport's cycle projects at the moment?
Sure, yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for the intro, Beate. Just a tiny bit of background about myself. Years ago, I used to work for Cycling England, but actually my interest in e-bikes predates that. That was e-bikes. We never managed to fit that into Cycling England's programme. I was actually the schools programme manager, and ever since then, I've been looking after the bikeability programme in one way or another. And then 5 months ago, I moved to the DFT to help them out because there was so much interest in cycling. I knew that the cycling and walking team was very stretched, and obviously there was a lot of excitement around cycling in the summer because of the obviously terrible pandemic. But one of the silver linings is that people weren't driving so much, the roads were quieter, and lots of people got back on their bikes. So I saw that as a tremendous opportunity and wanted to try to do my bit. I've also in the past done a lot with e-bikes because I've always been fascinated by the potential particularly to get people who don't think of themselves as cyclists to get into cycling because they're new, because actually when you ride them, they feel fantastic. But to my mind, that probably the biggest challenge is that the vast majority of people, they might think they know what an e-bike is, but until you've ridden one, it's very hard to describe. And I don't think you can genuinely say that you really know what it is until you've tried one. And something like only 5% or so of the population have actually tried one. So personally, I think that's the biggest challenge. I think if you can get people to try them, they sell themselves. In fact, the market is booming. And throughout continental Europe, we in the UK are a long way behind continental Europe. I think most people know that in the uptake of e-bikes. And in the gear change document, the government has committed trying to redress that balance and to bring us up to speed so that we uptake in the UK starts to catch up. I'll probably stop there so that I don't hog the intro time, but looking forward to questions and so on as well, and perhaps I'll have a chance to fill in on some of my other thoughts in a moment. I'll hand back to Beate to choose who to go next.
She's disappeared.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so I shall ask Phil to go next, please.
Oh, okay, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, well, I mean, just generally, there's a huge potential to increase cycling in the UK. I think the stats are in the latest Department for Transport decarbonisation strategy. About 60% of car trips are less than 5 miles. I mean, huge number, which is what I mean, about 30 minutes on a bike. And you know, I don't have to tell Raleigh that Britain used to be a cycling nation. If you look back at where we were in the kind of 1940s, 1950s, the amount of even with a much smaller population, the number of kilometres, miles cycle was enormous. But it kind of fell off a cliff as we began to just plan and design places. Obviously, the rise in car ownership, people could own a car. It was aspirational, and the whole of the transport profession, I think, including me when I began to practice, I think it just became the norm to not think about design for cycling. It was just excluded, and not surprisingly, you know, people just didn't do it. And I think we've now seen that we cannot continue with that path for all kinds of reasons: health, congestion, carbon emissions, and getting back to cycling being a significant element of everyday transport is really important and has to be achieved. And that will only happen if we broaden the demographic. You know, that will only happen if those people who are, as you say, Paul, you know, don't consider themselves cyclists and just want to get around. You know, they will take to cycling if it's convenient. And e-bikes just hugely broaden that demographic. You obviously you need a certain level of fitness to cycle up a hill. With an e-bike, it's just that much less, and you can obviously put more or less power, you know, depending on how you switch it. And you know, like they're just great fun. They are absolutely great. I first rode one in Sweden, in Malmo, a few years ago when I went on a study tour there, and I was just completely blown away. I thought, you know, what have I been missing all these years? So yeah, I think they're important. For me, they're an important element within the mix of how we'll begin to get mass cycling in so many parts of the country.
Should I
Yeah, we've lost Beate too.
Or Ed, are you back?
I am. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, you can. You're meant to go first, so I'll let you do your bit, then I'll do mine.
Thank you very much. Cheers. So my name's Ed. I've worked for Raleigh for a number of years, and my predominant role within the business now is working with local authorities and businesses that want to introduce e-bikes as a mode of transport primarily. So that, you know, using them as a utility vehicle, I guess. And I think it's fair to say that e-bikes have grown significantly over the past few years. Phil, as you mentioned, they open the opportunity for cycling for many people of all ages. They make it more fun. And I think crucially for us, it's about working with different industries, working with local authorities, working with central government, you know, on all aspects of how e-bikes and cycling generally can have real social and economic benefits. You know, in the gear change document that was released recently, and with all the announcements of funding, which is absolutely fantastic, it's really important that we keep the conversation going. You know, switch that temporary infrastructure to permanent infrastructure, and get as many people trialing bikes and particularly electric bikes as possible, to see if it's a viable solution. And you know, as a business, we're not saying it's the entire solution. I think it's part of, and it's how we work with the transport sector, how we work with, you know, logistics on e-cargo bikes, you know, how we just continue that conversation. I think what I would say is that the two biggest barriers that we've found working with businesses and local authorities to electric bikes is cycle safety and security, and obviously you know, locks and the way we store our bikes has to improve. And definitely, you know, that main piece about infrastructure, that's vital to getting more people on electric bikes.
Thanks,
Right.
Ed.
And oh, you're back. Hi, how you doing? You right?
All good in Todmorden. I don't know what's happened to our internet. let's go down to Cambridgeshire and see how you're doing then.
So thanks everyone. Thanks, Beate, and thanks for inviting me along to obviously provide our views. I guess a bit of background about myself. I guess I've worked in a few geographies across the world. I have looked at lots of active travel initiatives in other countries and integrated and instigated some of those initiatives in some of those countries. Recently returned back to the UK pre-COVID and back here, and obviously things has changed since February, March time going to lockdown, and there's a real push, I guess, from central government in terms of how I guess cycling, but active travel. It's more about active travel, about how people are actually travelling around and getting from A to B. And I don't necessarily need to describe Cambridge as as an area, or Peterborough, because I think probably most people know where Cambridge is, and I guess the geography, but also the amount of people that do cycle and walk. But we do have our issues, and obviously Ed picked up on some of them around security and safety, and security is quite a big aspect at the moment for the area. And obviously it's something that, obviously working with local authorities, with our county councils and our district councils, is something that will need to be considered, because it's some of those barriers or behaviours that could turn people off to actually cycling. So we've embarked, we are part of the e-scooter trials, actually trialling those out. But as part of that thinking and thoughts, we're also looking around introducing e-bikes very soon in our region, because we are very much about trying to get people from A to B. That first mile, last mile is obviously quite important, but getting people from their origin and destination. And from everyone I talk to, and I've used e-bikes for a couple of years, and all the others that I speak to, is that I guess from my own perspective, I think e-bikes are for everyone, not just for cycling fans. It is perfect for someone who wants to get from A to B. Yes, the kit may not be that cheap, but then when you start comparing it against the cost of actually operating a private car, then I think you do actually start seeing the economies of scale around that. But of the people that I do speak to, and the people that don't necessarily like to cycle, the fact that it's, I'd say, effortless to cycle using an e-bike, I think it does actually win people over. It does eventually, and it's those types of behaviours and everything we're trying to do to try and encourage people to actually come in and actually try it out, because then there are other modes as well to try and connect to: public transport, e-scooters. So yeah, that's my part at the moment anyway.
Thank you everyone, and again apologies for my brief absence from the backwoods of the Pennines. Really interesting set of experiences in the room today, and I'm seeing some questions coming in, and also picking up some themes here. One of the major themes seems to be the opportunities to try things out, and particularly e-bikes, particularly scooters. How are we actually engaging with people to enable them to try things out? Does anyone have any projects that they've implemented that have enabled people to actually get their hands on e-bikes, whether it's a broad scale, citywide kind of trial, or whether it's a workplace? And do you have any ideas about where the best way of doing that? How do you get bums on seats and feet on pedals? Phil, you're nodding.
Can I Beate? Oh, sorry, Phil.
No, go for it, Paul. Go.
Just to say that not in my DFT role, but a few years ago, I started a thing called the Electric Bicycle Network, which
I'm not getting anything from Paul.
Yeah, I can hear him.
We can hear okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll carry on. Sorry, Beate. It's a thing called the Electric Bicycle Network, which had a couple of hundred bikes, mainly in national parks, at hotels and guest houses and so on, really as a way to try to catch people unawares. They were not cyclists. They were there for a weekend or on holiday. And the hotel said, would you like to take out an electric bike for the day, and we'll give you a picnic, just as a way to try to get people who would never normally think of cycling to give it a go. If you offered them a normal bike, they'd say, no thanks, I know what cycling's all about and I don't really like it. But because it's new, I don't think it's just that it's easier and so on. It's the newness that appeals to people. But to answer the question, to achieve that in a big way, somebody, Sylvia, I think, one of the questions, how do we get people to try them out? Are there any try before you buy schemes? Well, bike share has a part to play. If you look to Paris, for example, the way that they've incorporated e-bikes into their Velib scheme is exemplary. I mean, I was lucky enough to see that on my way through Paris, kind of in the period between lockdowns, and it really is amazing. And I think that's one way to get lots of people to try e-bikes, but also I'm very much in favour of mass opportunities to get people to ride them for a very short time, not necessarily described as before you buy. Be a bit off-putting. Anyway, sorry, Phil, hogging that response.
No. I was just going to say, I know that there are some public bike hire systems that use e-bikes. So Oxford Line Bikes. There are public bike hire that people can try if they're lucky enough to have that in a city that they visit. And I think that's a really, really good way to try. It just cost you a couple of pounds to have a go for half an hour, and that I think would be potentially quite transformative. Of course, I mean there are lots of retailers who will very happily let you have a go. There are centres around and retailers who specialise in e-bikes, so I wouldn't have thought it's too difficult to have a go.
Mehmet, you had your hand up briefly.
Yeah, so it was just touching on what Phil and Paul has said. In our particular example, in our region, Cambridgeshire Peterborough region, we started out with, as part of the DFT trials around e-scooters, we did quite a big piece of work to obviously try and promote, that first and last mile aspect. And, we started with quite a small area within the Cambridge city centre. We've grown that area slightly, but obviously through that, we've done a lot of engagement with our operator that we're working with. But on top of that, on the back of that as well, we're doing some work around, because we're going to introduce the e-bikes as well very soon. We're using the e-scooters as a bit of a catalyst for the e-bikes as well, to try and again encourage people along, to say that they're coming soon to our city. Please try before you buy, for example. And I think that's probably a really good way to actually get people to, encourage people to actually just use them, because I think they would be excited when they use them.
Yes, Ed, I see you. Do you have try before you buy? Raleigh?
We don't, but actually I just wanted to highlight some of the projects that I've been really fortunate to be involved with at Raleigh, and some of the partnerships that we have with local authorities now, both with cargo and electric bikes, are really fantastic initiatives. And actually there was a question that linked to this in the poll, in the Q&A there, and it mentioned about getting new people on electric bikes, and how do you get parents on electric bikes with the potential of them cycling to school, because that is something that was key in the recent announcements about school streets and really changing behaviour. And one really fantastic project was with Sheffield County Council, who purchased 160 electric bikes from us, with exactly that the view to them being used as a try before you buy initiative, where people could try them for a period of time, and if they were happy with them, then of course they would then hopefully go on and purchase one. And I think that's really key to the success of electric bikes. It's much more like a car purchase. They're much higher value. They're totally different. There's sorts of different concerns about security and storage and all those sorts of things. And that is just one example of how to really get more people cycling.
I think that's been my experience as well. We've got the Cargo Dale project that I've been running in Todmorden. We've got bikes which are mainly for delivery, but because we're just a small project, we can offer the people the opportunity to try them. And we've already had one small business buy their own cargo bike, one family buy a cargo bike. And so just having them around and enabling people to try them, they have massive smiles on their faces when they have a go. And it's a real sort of advertising for itself kind of experience. But that does bring me on to the you get this amazing bike. It's cost you several £1,000s in most instances. How do you keep it secure? There are a lot of questions on the Q&A about people being worried about losing it, not wanting to leave them at train stations or outside cafes, because once you've invested, you don't want to have your bike stolen. So anyone feel like answering the safety and security and keeping track of your e-bike question? I'm looking at you, Ed, just in case you were feeling like you didn't want to jump straight back in.
Yeah. So technology has advanced so much that in recent years we're working on various projects with various companies about tracking and GPS tracking of the bikes, and that in itself has many benefits. Route planning, particularly for cargo bikes, and traffic flow and hotspots with heat mapping. So I would say in the next few months we're going to see a huge development in the ability to track bikes, which in itself will be a real benefit. The first and most obvious is removing the battery from a bike whenever it's parked. Insurance, there's lots of insurance companies out there that have affordable policies. Phil, did you want to jump in there?
No. After you finished. No. After you finished, yeah, go for it.
There's significant value in the batteries, which on the majority of electric bikes are removable, so that dissuades people in itself. And obviously a good quality certified, and we use Sold Secure, which are insurance standard approved locks. They're key, I think.
Yeah.
So, Phil, I know you want to answer. Well, I have a slight disability here that I cannot see Paul on my screen. So if Paul wants to jump in, let me know, and then
I'll go after Phil.
Yeah, okay. I know. I'm just gonna make an observation actually that my wife's got an e-bike, and that's been absolutely key to me going on cycling touring holidays, because she would never have done it without that. So it's been brilliant. And just making the point that her bike has a removable battery, and we found that really, really useful, because if you're doing any kind of and holidays on e-bikes are great as well, because weight doesn't matter so much and you can get around and take luggage and things. But always have a problem charging it up. So if you don't have removable batteries, you have to have a power supply at the cycle parking, and you do get that. I remember we a few years ago we did the Danube cycle trail, and that's very well equipped, and all the hotels and guest houses along the Danube trail, they have power sockets with the bike parking, but that's still quite unusual. So having that ability to remove the battery has security advantages, as you say, Ed, but also it just makes the thing much more flexible when it comes to charging. So some of the more modern e-bikes have a kind of the batteries in the tubes, and that looks more elegant. I guess there's a value to that, but I kind of like the flexibility of that removable battery for a number of reasons.
Has Paul got anything to add? Can anyone let me know?
Yeah. I'll just jump in Beate, the original question that's got 9 votes now suggested using part of multi-storey car parks for bike storage. And I happen to be based in Cambridge as well, by the way. There's quite a Cambridge flavour to this whole thing. And we've got 2 of those, two of indoor bike parks. Would invite people, well, in fact 3 if you count the one at the railway station. But it's sadly isn't sufficient. You do need CCTV, which is actually monitored with somebody actually responsible for it. I'm afraid our one at the Cambridge railway station has developed a bit of a reputation for not being monitored. It's become quite a hotspot for bike theft. So you need the reassurance not only of somewhere safe to lock it, but knowing that it's supervised in some way, either with CCTV or, and this might not be a popular idea, but I remember cycling in the Netherlands where bike theft is equally a massive problem of both e-bikes and regular bikes, that quite often in town centres you have managed parking, like with a parking attendant, you pay maybe €1 and lock it in a safe space and you get a ticket, a bit like a cloakroom. And yeah, it may not be popular. People don't really want to have to pay to park their bikes. We've got used to doing it for free, but maybe their experience, they're so many years ahead of us, maybe we ought to look to them and see that in desperate times, desperate measures are called for. But that really is it's going to be for local authorities to decide whether that's necessary given the local circumstances.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't keep up with all of that from the internet desert I appear to be in. So amongst the many sort of issues that people are looking at is how are we providing infrastructure for these vehicles? What plans have people got? What experiences do you have? Maybe Phil, you could answer a little bit about infrastructure amendments and changes that we can make to encourage particularly e-biking and scooters.
So I think apart from perhaps that issue around cycle parking and the need perhaps of charging and extra security, the infrastructure is much the same. It is the same. I mean, essentially an e-bike is just a bicycle with an extra bit of power. It's got more than just your legs to get it to go. So actually, I mean, the good news is they don't require any different infrastructure. It is just what it is. The speed that you can go on an e-bike, yes, you would go a little bit faster up a hill than you might without it, but the power would cut off at 15.5 miles an hour to be legal in this country. And therefore, it will not take you any faster. There's no different requirement. So we just need we need infrastructure, and that's what gear change is all about, and the new local transport notes. And in some ways, I think what's happening with the local transport note that's come out quite recently is that it's a levelling up. There's nothing too much in LTN 120 that isn't in the London Cycling Design Standards. So London has been doing it for some time. Manchester's been doing it for some time. Cambridge, other places. But this is now just saying to the kind of whole of the country, we need to do this. If we want mass cycling, the only way we'll achieve it is to provide the kind of infrastructure that gets those people who are not comfortable cycling with motor traffic to get on their bikes, whether it's an ordinary bike or an e-bike. So I think that's the kind of key message, and I'm very pleased that gear change is really pushing that as a key policy with Active Travel England. We hope to see that soon. Perhaps Paul might be able to say something about where the department's at with Active Travel England, but I see that as really, really significant because we know what to do technically. The choices are kind of financial and political. It's are we willing to take a little bit of space away from motor vehicles to create networks, and that's the question.
I think one of the major differences is weight, or speed is one thing, and I think the thing about weight means that you have to be particularly careful to build your cycle infrastructure without any steps at all. And some of these things where we have local railway bridges where there's a tiny little rut that you put your wheel in to push your very heavy bike up an incline, it's really not appropriate. And it's also not appropriate for people with adapted bicycles of any shape or cut form who can't dismount, please, to get across a certain area. And I think, one of the things that has been good in the guidelines that you've produced is that those sorts of things have gone, but going back and revising some of our cycle infrastructure to take out some of those inhibiting factors is quite important. Mehmet, I think you wanted to add in something.
Yeah, I did, and it's all around what obviously Phil touched on, was around there's obviously a reallocation of space, isn't there? There obviously would need to be considered for some of our streets. Obviously, the way planning has gone for the past, 100 years or so, obviously doesn't necessarily permit, at the moment, the way that the network is set up for you to actually reallocate that space. However, obviously, since we're in this, new world where we are, where obviously a lot of people have been working from home, and there has been a big push from government around the emergency travel funds for these pop-up cycle lanes and etc. And obviously only recently they've given further money. And back in May time, it was all about let's get these schemes out quickly at pace. But the recent fund that has recently been received by a lot of authorities across the UK is more about, well, how can we actually provide high quality schemes, and not necessarily at pace, but how can we actually deliver those to actually make that change? And it is all around how space could potentially be reallocated. It's the traffic levels here in Cambridge and Peterborough hasn't gone back to the same levels as they have yet. They haven't, but I guess time will tell if certain things around office space and things like that will change and how people are travelling. So it'll be interesting. I think we've got an interesting couple of months, a year ahead of us. I think we've got a good platform now to be working on, and this is probably our one chance almost now to actually instigate some of this stuff. So, and we've got some good people to actually do it. So, got good experiences.
Does anyone want to add anything?
Just another non-DFT thing, really, but a Cambridge observation as a Cambridge resident. One of the things that, and it touches on some of the other questions that have come up around cargo bikes and carrying children. If you come to Cambridge, you'll see there's been an absolute revolution in the use of e-cargo bikes, in particular for taking children to and from school, and just for using to take children around. It's quite amazing. And the thing that opened that up, and I don't think whoever it was in Cambridgeshire County Council who made it happen gets near enough credit for it, was the opening up of the commons, the routes to and from the commons, which used to be too difficult to get any sizable bike or cycle onto. And they took out the old pram arms and replaced them with cattle grids, and that suddenly opened up lots of routes. And Cambridge can't be unique in that regard. There must be other places that could benefit from some lateral thinking like that. I'm not sure it was actually the intention at the time, but certainly an unintended consequence has been an absolute boom in both cargo bikes and cargo bikes for carrying passengers as well as cargo itself.
Phil, would you like to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say generally, the whole push for low traffic neighbourhoods, which we've seen and has attracted an enormous amount of media interest and controversy, but I think generally they are more supported than objected to. But anything that you do to make it a more convoluted route to go by car, you will encourage people to use bikes or walk for those short trips, and that goes for all kinds of trips. So that's the accompanied trip to school, the shopping trip, the trip to work, the cargo bike. So I think the more that we see LTNs coming in, the more we'll see that it actually makes good economic sense for couriers to move to cargo bikes, because they'll be able to get around so much faster and more efficiently, and without having to pay the fuel cost, the insurance cost. So, Beate, you must know the kind of economics of this better than I do.
Yes, I think it's definitely an interesting one. The insurance costs are pretty good, but you have to pay people to do deliveries, so the hourly rates are just similar to driving. it's an interesting one. I'll report more when we're a bit further into Project Cargo Tail. One of the things that people have been coming up with on the Q&A is very much about the cargo bikes, and do they require training, and even e-bikes, do they require training? And from my point of view, because I am the name on the insurance for Cargo Tail, I won't let anyone go out without having tried out a cargo bike. It's quite a different thing. Once you're on it, I absolutely love it. But those first couple of goes on a cargo bike are pretty interesting, because your wheel's miles away from you. You don't necessarily see where you're going, and you've got to get used to the weight and all sorts of things. So I would argue very much that training for people on e-cargo bikes is important, even though it's not strictly legally required. Mehmet, you've got a point to make.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a new form of transport, isn't it? I think it's like anything, you know. We did the same with e-scooters. And you know, like e-cargo bikes, you know, you need to provide some form of training or whatever it is for people to actually try it out prior to it, because you need them to feel confident while using it, because otherwise, if they don't feel confident, then they won't go back to it. I'm all for providing further training and stuff. I think that would be good. It's all about behaviour change at the end of the day, isn't it? So,
Ed,
sorry to jump in there, just to sort of reiterate that point. I couldn't agree more. This is absolutely about behaviour change, and actually not quite to the extent that cargo bikes need training, but I do think electric bikes as well. You know, the times and the new ways in which we are living means that more people are choosing active travel. And I mean, I myself have never walked or cycled so much to get a small amount of shopping that previously I would have driven, which, you know, and it's absolutely the same for a huge number of people across the country. And you know, e-bikes are something that's completely new, and I think exactly as Mehmet said, you know, to encourage people to feel safe and secure on them, I think training is really essential for both cargo bikes and electric bikes.
We're seeing a lot of electric bikes where I live. From lockdown, it was amazing. My partner is a mountain bike journalist, and he was, they're never going to take off. And then lockdown happened, and they were absolutely everywhere. So they're definitely a thing. And we live in a very hilly area, so that's it's helping people out.
Can I
Paul, you keen to comment
on this? I know you can't hear me, Beate. Sorry about that.
Right. I have a quick bit of information for someone who thinks we've got a question about every bike needing a SIM card, and this is a purely practical piece of information. We have had trackers in our cargo bikes for 7 months with a £10 SIM card in them, and none of them have run out of data. So we're SIM cards may seem like an expensive thing, but they don't. And I have another question which seems to have disappeared now.
I think if you can hear me, Beate,
wanting to see.
I was going to say Paul wanted to come in. I think if you can hear me,
Paul, I'm terribly sorry. Writing flying blind slightly on the on your screen.
I was just about to leave and rejoin to see if we could cure that, but before I do, on the training aspect, you won't be surprised, given my ability to hear that, I'm definitely in favour of cycle training for cargo bike riders, and indeed for regular e-bikes. You'll see that the Dutch, again, way ahead of us, have found that actually there have been more incidents, particularly with older riders actually riding e-bikes, and a fair few fatalities. So they have belatedly started to introduce the training programme for e-bike riders, but also it's one of the other things that was in the gear change document that you may or may not have spotted was the government's commitment to not only to making bikeability available to every child by the time they leave school, but also to any adult who wants it. So there's scope there. We haven't decided yet exactly how that's going to happen, how it's going to be rolled out. Clearly, the delivery will be local, but there's potential there for training to be available for anybody who wants it. And I think actually we'd like to work with retailers so that when people buy a bike, there's some kind of swim tag that points them to where they can get training. So that's the sort of things that we're thinking of. We haven't worked out the details yet, but I'm going to leave and rejoin now so that Beate hopefully.
Thank you, Paul. We're coming up to the end of the webinar now. Does anyone have any final reflections that they'd like to make just before we draw it to a close? Ed?
So I think, you know, from a brand with huge heritage in the UK, where, you know, in previous times 1 in 3 were cycling, I think electric bikes have the capability to get us back to that. You know, it's about getting people that maybe have considered it or thought about it, and it's about, you know, taking them to the next step through one of these try before you buy, or going into one of our retailers who would be more than happy to organize a demo of electric bikes, or, you know, contacting us directly. I think this is about also us reaching out to businesses, and, you know, the social and economic and health benefits to individuals of cycling are huge, and we want to work with businesses and local authorities to really push that message.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll go closing point. I guess it's where I started really, around, you know, obviously active travel as a buzzword, but it's all around trying to get people from A to B. And obviously on this specific example around e-bikes and stuff, you know, it isn't just for cycling fans. It just, you know, I think it is for quite a lot of people, and, you know, just to get from their origin destination point. And you know, I think, you know, I'd hope to think that, you know, it'd be interesting to see some surveys, I think, in terms of, you know, how e-bike riders actually feel around traffic, and whether they do actually feel vulnerable around traffic, because some of the barriers to cycling and stuff, from my discussions and stuff, to normal cycling against e-bikes is the fear of actually riding against the traffic. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but it's quite promising. I think there's a lot of work out there. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of good examples.
I think just to add to that point, when Como UK did some research when we had an e-bike project several years ago now, and one of the really interesting things was particularly women found the e-bikes much more liberating. They felt that they were more able to ride away in traffic. They felt safer in general, and I think that this is no excuse for not going down a decent infrastructure route. Absolutely, don't take this as a e-bikes over infrastructure thing. But it did help people feel more confident. The idea that they had some, you know, they were able to move away from traffic that had acceleration. They had a bit more ability to move with the flow of traffic, and that's something I've definitely found with powered cargo bikes as well. You don't have the same intimidation factor, because you know you can do 20 miles an hour just about and keep up through roadworks or whatever. So yeah, yes.
I'd agree with that. I don't know if people have seen the really interesting work that Rachel Aldred did around the near miss project. So a few years ago, she asked people who rode on a particular day just to note down any time in that journey if they had felt uncomfortable with a near miss, and it was quite concerning. You know, it's very common. But those of us who do cycle know it is quite common. But what was even more concerning was that the proportion of near misses that women reported a higher proportion of near misses than men, and all kinds of reasons why that could be. But one could well be that women just tend to ride a little more slowly, and therefore, you know, if you ride more slowly, you'll get past more often. And so, as you say, you know, e-bikes are kind of a leveling up, that you don't have to be so strong, you don't have to be so big. You can still kind of keep up and get your speed up, and just make it a more comfortable experience, and something that feels feels and probably is, safer as well. So I absolutely agree. I think, and there's a kind of logic for that.
Thank you. Paul?
Paul's gone black on my screen.
Paul's not here for me either. Well, I think we've had an enormously interesting discussion, and over the last 45 minutes, quite a few things and topics and themes have emerged. It's very exciting that we are making a start. Our standards on infrastructure have gone up. We've had a lot more experience during the lockdown months. We've seen more e-bikes on the streets. We've seen scooters emerge into trial programs. We've got we're on the way, but I do think it's baby steps still. We really do need to see those trials out there, more people being able to access bikes and e-bikes and scooters, and really find out what the opportunities are for themselves. Particularly people who are maybe less mobile as well. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned in the last year was that e-bikes offer opportunities to people who don't have full mobility when they're walking around, but can give them absolute liberation when it comes to cycling, and that's an absolutely fantastic. So marrying together the opportunity to try and the decent infrastructure that enables bikes and trikes to take to the roads is super important. And I think we really do need to see. I remember when I was a very small child, sort of in the 70s and 80s, there was a time that the police really went on the offensive on car theft. And I think I personally really appreciate seeing something along those lines, marrying up bike identification trackers and really strong action on bike theft, because if you are depending on a bike and you leave it outside the supermarket, you really want to see that bike there when you get out of the supermarket. It's not just a discretionary item, it is your mode of transport. And then the other elements I'm seeing is a lot about training. It ties in very much with trying out, because if you've been doing this kind of thing from a young age, you don't think of it as training, you just think of it as learning. And we in the UK haven't maybe encouraged our children to ride bikes from such a young age, or maybe they've started when they're little, they've ridden on the pavement, and then when it's got to sort of like the age where you really think they should be riding on the roads, you've worried and not let them do that. So I think in the UK we've kind of got a generational thing where we really need to catch up on that training, that trying out, and making sure that people feel really confident and secure when they're riding bikes, e-bikes, whatever mode of active travel transport they would like to adopt. So lots of things to think about. Still a way to go, but it's been exciting for sure the last few months in terms of making those steps. Really like to thank Raleigh for sponsoring the webinar, and Smart Transport for hosting it. My guests, Ed, Mehmet, Phil and Paul, thank you very much for being here and sharing your experience. And I've just got a reminder here that there's another webinar on Wednesday the 16th of December where we'll be discussing zero emission logistics, and for sure I'll want to be there. Thanks very much everyone. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.